into caricatures and in some situations to become minstrels. I mean, there's whole TV shows which kind of just exist to demonize Māori people, like Police 10-7, didn't really help our nation.
The majority of crime is fueled by alcohol.
Why don't you go arrest the guy as a mother?
With a dangerously aggressive.
This is the state of your children.
Police are increasingly finding themselves in the line of fire.
I mean, my grandfather went to a native school and was taught how to use his hands because apparently that's all Māori were good at. They didn't have higher intellectual abilities. They were limited in terms of their cognitive function. All of these crazy ideas that have required over time Māori to rebut and overcome, and the idea of misrepresentation is very much the history of Aotearoa.
When I think about the idea of assimilation, of fitting into a dominant narrative, it sometimes feels like finding your place in a social hierarchy, and no one wants to be at the bottom. I've seen the worst stereotypes of Māori being perpetuated by immigrants. I've been guilty of it myself in the past, and I've been learning to grow.
There's situations in history where Māori and the first Asian immigrants that came to New Zealand were pitted against one another purely because of racist and racialized fears.
And I wonder if, at a deeper level, we're children in a playground trying to fit in, thinking that if we go along with the bullying, the name-calling, the othering, that we'll be safe from the worst of it. But it never works that way.
And I hope that that's maybe what comes out of this, is that that people build a hapori, a community that's interactive and open and listens and pays attention, because it allows opportunities for each member of that community to mutually grow. And I think that's maybe the thing that we need. We need a community. We need people working with one another. We need opportunities to reflect on who we are and who others are. You need difference to be able to do that. So I think, yeah.
What I saw in those days after March 15 was a glimpse into a New Zealand that we could build together. A house that all of us feel kaitiaki over, a shared responsibility, a persistent sense of community, family. It's an image we often believe ourselves to be, but many times fall short of. But yet I think it's one I still truly believe in.
That was episode 3 of Mohammed Hassan's series, The Guest House. To hear more, head to rnz.co.nz. And the podcast is on iTunes and Spotify. Now let's hand over to a special edition of Checkpoint with Lisa Owen as we listen to the government's fiscal response to Covid-19.
Good afternoon. This is the Checkpoint Business Bailout Special. We'll be with you until 2:30 this afternoon as we analyse the government's just released stimulus package aimed at supporting business and workers kneecapped by the Covid-19 pandemic. That could hit us harder than the global financial crisis. Air New Zealand's today slashed Trans-Tasman flights by 80% and our share market opened more than 4% down. Heavy border restrictions and isolation rules mean tourist flows are down to a trickle and the new norm could last for months. Joining us is our political editor Jane Patterson, economist Shamubeel Eaqub and Brett O'Reilly, CEO of the Employers and Manufacturers Association. And we will cross live to Parliament for Finance Minister Grant Robertson's speech. Now don't forget, you can watch us live on Facebook, Freeview Channel 50 and our website.
RNZ News at 2 o'clock. I'm Paul Brennan. The government has unleashed what it calls the most significant peacetime economic plan in New Zealand's modern history. The just-announced $12.1 billion rescue package designed to cushion the economic blow of Covid-19 includes wage subsidies, sick leave support and an across-the-board boost in benefits. The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, says it represents 4% of GDP and is one of the largest set of measures in the world on a per capita basis.
There is no costless decision in this situation. We are acting now to avoid the kinds of scenes that we are seeing overseas.
Grant Robertson. The biggest component of the package is a $5 billion wage subsidy scheme. Struggling workplaces will receive about $585 a week per full-time employee for 12 weeks, up to a maximum of $150,000 per business. People who are unable to work after falling sick or being quarantined will receive the same sum for up to 8 weeks, on top of any employer-provided sick leave. Most of the measures are aimed at small businesses, but separate support will be available for big businesses, along with a $600 million package for the aviation sector, apart from Air New Zealand. However, beneficiaries will also get an immediate and permanent increase of $25 a week, and the winter energy payment will be doubled this year. A $500 million fund is dedicated to strengthening health services, including a near doubling of the number of public health units to boost contact tracing and capacity. And that's the news. It's coming up to 2 minutes past 2.
Good afternoon and welcome to this Checkpoint Business Bailout Special. We'll be with you until 2:30 this afternoon as we analyse the government's stimulus package released today to support those businesses and people impacted by the Covid-19 pandemic. Now, here is a summary. The package is worth $12.1 billion. This represents 4% of GDP, more than all of this government's operating spending in 3 budgets combined. It includes wage subsidies of $5.1 billion, which will mean $585 for full-time staff and $350 for part-time staff, capped at $150,000 per business. $500 million will go to health. Another $2.8 billion will be invested in business tax changes to free up cash flow. $126 million in a self-isolation support package, and the winter energy payment will be doubled. We will be joined by our political editor, Jane Patterson, economist Shamubeel Eaqub and Brett O'Reilly, the CEO of the Employers and Manufacturers Association. But first we're going to go to the Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, who is speaking in Parliament.
We will fight the virus. We will cushion the blow for businesses and workers. We will position for recovery. We have been and we will be swift, decisive and compassionate. Mr. Speaker, the global Covid-19 pandemic is wreaking havoc around the world. The virus's exponential spread has seen whole countries shut down in their attempts to slow and contain the spread. The result has been unprecedented economic and social disruption across the globe. And we are not immune, of course. I cannot and must not sugarcoat this. A recession in New Zealand is now almost certain, with the advice that we are receiving that the shock will be larger than that seen during the global financial crisis. This will affect every part of our economy now and for some time to come. We are going to see many New Zealanders lose their jobs and some businesses will fail. We will have an extended period of deficits and our debt as a country will have to substantially increase. Our package announced today and the support that will continue to come will do our best to cushion that blow. It is heartening, Mr. Speaker, that we face this with our books in good shape. We have kept net debt low at 19.5% of GDP, which is lower than we inherited it. We have worked hard to be ready for the rainy day that has now arrived. There is no costless decision in this situation. The economic impacts of the spread of Covid-19 were clear before our decision to extend border restrictions. I stand by the wisdom and the courage of that decision. We are taking decisive action to avoid what we have seen overseas and implement measures that give us a fighting chance of mitigating the worst here, and I make no apologies for that. Whatever costs we are now dealing with pale in comparison to the loss of life and devastation that would come with inaction. Clearly, there are tough times ahead. I acknowledge the uncertainty and anxiety many people will be feeling right now. I want to say directly to those people, we will get through this together. The government's economic response package is the largest investment in our lifetimes, designed for the unique nature of the disruption caused by COVID-19. It comes on top of the $12 billion New Zealand upgrade program. I want to thank New Zealand First and the Green Party for their help in putting this package together. The overall investment in the economic response package is $12.1 billion across the forecast period, one of the largest responses in the world on a per capita basis. To give you an idea of the scale of the package I am announcing today, it represents nearly 4% of GDP and more than the total of all of the new operating spending in the 3 budgets in this term of government put together. The package has 3 components. Extra support for the health system to enable an increased public health response so New Zealand can slow any potential domestic outbreak. A substantial package to cushion the impact of the economic shock on businesses and workers and support confidence in the near term. And the first phase of a broader recovery package to support household incomes through the shock and to spur our economic recovery. Obviously, the ultimate recovery package will go well beyond the measures announced today, and this year's budget will be the second phase of our broader recovery package. Our first response is a public health one. It is our fundamental duty. It is also the first and best economic response. The hard work and dedication of our health workforce and the personal responsibility that New Zealanders are showing with regard to protecting themselves and others is a great line of first defence. We must continue that work to smooth the curve of the inevitable increase in infections. Today's package includes a commitment of an additional $500 million to support our Go Hard, Go Early, Contain COVID-19 strategy. There will be further support to come. Under this plan, the health system is increasing capacity and capability. This will mean scaling up public communications to ensure people have practical advice and support to contain the virus and stay healthy and how to self-isolate, ensuring continuity of care in the community, strengthening our ability to test and trace cases, and strengthening our ability to treat cases. To achieve this, our actions in the next 30 days will be split into 2 phases. Immediate actions including a public information campaign, upscaling testing, boosting Healthline, surging containment and isolation procedures, establishing community-based assessment clinics, and a whole of system focus on meeting workforce demand and PPE needs. Our medium-term actions include further support for hospitals and community providers to deal with a surge of patients, and including further advice for caring people at home. Mr. Speaker, I want to pay tribute to the health professionals and staff who are working around the clock to protect New Zealanders' well-being. We owe you so much, and today's package is a sign of our support for your work. In addition to the significant boost to the health system I have mentioned, we are also introducing a COVID-19 leave payment scheme. This is to incentivise self-isolation by employees, the self-employed and contractors. Self-isolation is critical to the success of our public health strategy, and we know that some workers are facing barriers, financial ones, to self-isolation. This scheme will provide support through employers and to sole traders and the self-employed for those people unable to work who are in self-isolation and unable to work, or are sick or caring for dependents who are in either of those situations. Employers will still be expected to meet all of their sick leave and other employment expectations. The key parameters for the scheme are an entitlement period of 14 days for those self-isolating and for the entire period of sickness for those who contract COVID-19. Eligibility is open to all firms, the self-employed and for contractors, but not for those who can work from home. Full-time workers will receive $585 per week under the scheme. The scheme will be in place for an initial 8-week period, at which point the government will reassess based on the health situation at the time. Employers will have to sign a declaration confirming that they meet the criteria for receiving this funding. Any false declaration would be committing fraud. Given the size and speed of the economic shock that we are facing, we recognise the immediate need to support businesses and workers to cushion the economic impact on households and firms. We want to help boost cash flow and confidence in the economy through this uncertain period. It is why we are establishing a wage subsidy scheme.
And that is Finance Minister Grant Robertson delivering his speech there after the government has unveiled its business rescue package. We are now going to cross live to Parliament, where our editor is standing by, Jane Patterson. Jane, can you just give us a bit more detail around the wage subsidy, the headline of the package in essence?
So this really is the bulk of the package, and this is really aimed at trying to keep those jobs in play, even at a lower rate of pay per week for those people, and up to 12 weeks at this point. Now, if it gets past that, then the government would relook at what they might have to do beyond that. But for the next 12 weeks, employers will get a certain amount. So for full-time, that is about $585 and $350 per employee for part-timers. Now, what that is that goes to the employer, and then they basically say, they make a pledge that they will keep on those people at about 80% of their pay. So that's not the direct amount. So that's a commitment employers have to make. So a big part of this package at $5.1 billion.
What about beneficiaries? What's in there for them?
So from today, or immediate effect, main benefit rates will increase by $25 a week. I imagine that this was something the government was looking at anyway, this May budget, and has brought forward, but also really to look after those elderly people who of course are vulnerable to COVID-19. There's going to be a doubling of the winter energy payment. Now, other beneficiaries do get that payment, but this is really to make sure that elderly people have a bit more cash. Now, not only does this give people a bit more money to spend who are vulnerable, but also it means that money will probably be spent. It encourages people to get out there and not to hunker down too much, because that's another impact on the economy. The government still wants people out there spending where possible.
Jane, can you clarify for us? Obviously, the benefit and the minimum wage were both supposed to increase on the 1st of April. Is this extra $25 in addition to that increase or instead of?
So it would be, the benefit change would be what it has been announced today, but the actual minimum wage will go up as scheduled on the 1st of April. So this would not be on top of what would have been planned, except for the benefit increases to be brought forward.
Also, what can you tell us about the aviation industry? Any thing for them in this, given that Air New Zealand today has slashed Trans-Tasman flights by 80%?
That's right. Obviously, the aviation industry, a hugely vulnerable industry. Now, there is $600 million in this package for the aviation industry, but that's probably going to more go to the likes of airports and that sort of thing. This does not include Air New Zealand. I asked the Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, what is going to happen with the national carrier. He said talks are still underway, and we could be looking at a scenario where the government increases its shareholding. For example, it's a shareholder in New Zealand and gets capital into the business that way. But obviously Air New Zealand is a separate case, and it'll be treated that way.
The other big issue at the moment is people having to take leave, in essence, to self-isolate. Now, the government is addressing this.
$126 million will be available to employers, and basically they can go to the Ministry of Social Development and say, we have a number of employees self-isolating, and obviously that really starts to stretch people's sick leave or annual leave and employers' capacity to pay for that. So they'll be getting money basically to ease that pressure, but also part of that is to make sure that people aren't coming to work, or that they're reluctant to go and self-isolate for 14 days for financial reasons. So employers will be able to apply to the Ministry of Social Development for roughly the same sort of support as that wage subsidy, about $585 for a full-time employee.
Thanks, Jane. That's Jane Patterson, our political editor, who's been at the lockup for this business stimulus package. The headlines again, it's a $12.1 billion package. A large chunk of that money, $5.1 billion, is going towards wage subsidies for people who would otherwise lose their job, and businesses who have lost at least 30% in their revenue over the months that this has been hitting us. Now, it is almost 15 minutes past 2, and you're with Checkpoint for this special program this afternoon. And joining me now in the Auckland studio is Brett O'Reilly. He's the CEO of the Employers and Manufacturers Association. And also economist Shamubeel Eaqub is joining us via Skype. Good afternoon to you both. If I can start with you, Shamubeel, how significant is this at $12.1 billion?
This is absolutely extraordinary because the scale of the fiscal stimulus is much bigger than any other country has put forward. So the biggest we've seen in any other country was only 1.5% of GDP, and this is 4%. And it's been very targeted, very broad. It is absolutely fantastic.
So what would success look like as a result of this? What can our expectations be in terms of stimulating the economy and giving us a kick and getting us moving again?
Well, this is not actually about stimulating the economy. It's about reducing the downside. A recession is baked in. It's definitely going to happen. The question is, can we reduce the impact on real people in terms of their ability to pay their bills, buy food, and all those kinds of things, but also the ability to maintain jobs. So I think this goes a hell of a long way to doing those two things, preserving jobs and avoiding business failures.
Let's bring Brett into the conversation. Brett, you saw the wage subsidies there. What's your immediate reaction to the figures, which are $585.80 a week for a full-time worker and $350 for a part-time worker?
Look, I think the government's really listened to the feedback we've been providing them through the Business New Zealand network, and I think this is what employers are looking for. I agree with Shamubeel. I think this is about keeping cohesion in the economy, actually keeping businesses intact, and I think that the government has really responded in a very ambitious way around this. So I think our members will be delighted with this as a first step. Obviously, at this stage, it's only targeted between January and June, and that will also give us a chance to see what the real impact of coronavirus is as we get into the winter, which seems to be the real danger period for most countries.
Businesses are going to have to prove that they've had a 30% decline in revenue within those months that you've just mentioned. It's going to be capped at $150,000 per business and up to 12 weeks of relief. We're being told that this could go on beyond Christmas. So is this going to last long enough?
Well, we've asked the question about, how difficult will the criteria be, and the word back from officials is they're going to use a high trust model, so they're going to trust businesses. The process for accessing it will be filling in an online form via the Work and Income portal, so the Ministry of Social Development are managing this process. Businesses will access the funding by filling out a form and submitting that via the portal, and of course they can get advice from organisations like ours around that. So I think in the short term, it's relatively simple, and it enables businesses to, maintain that cohesion today. Beyond June, I guess we're all hoping that we'll be able to get on top of this and we won't have further impact on the economy. Of course, it's also worth remembering that China, which is one of our big markets, is now actually starting to come back online again. So some of our members are saying, actually, we're those people who are exporting are still exporting to China and starting to see things like timber mills come back online. So there will be a mixed response for each business depending on where their exposures are.
Shamubeel, we also are hearing, obviously, there's going to be $25 extra a week for those beneficiaries on a main benefit and doubling the winter energy payment. Can you explain the logic of that to us?
Essentially, it's giving money to people who will spend it. Because if we had a tax cut, it would go to everybody. And essentially, people who are in middle and high incomes are less likely to spend that money. So by giving it to people who are most at need and with the lowest incomes, you make sure that money is going to be spent. And also the increase of the winter energy payments is really important because it means that older folk will be able to keep their places dry and warm through the winter, because that's a real risk in terms of the infection spreading during our coming winter months.
The other thing is, in terms of the level of expenditure, 4% of GDP, as we have discussed, and Grant Robertson saying that it's basically the combined new operating spending from the last, three budgets combined. Where's that going to leave them in terms of wiggle room for the big budget, the budget in May?
It doesn't matter. I mean, we are facing an unprecedented crisis. We are choosing between a recession and a depression. If we don't use our balance sheet to significantly spend money to shore up our economy and to invest in the recovery, then there will be no economy and there will be no need for debt. So I don't think we should be really worrying about that stuff. The thing is, when the budget comes, they should be borrowing even more money to really invest in the recovery when it comes. And the Reserve Bank is absolutely ready to print money, do quantitative easing, to keep our borrowing costs low. So I'm not at all worried about the cost of debt or the amount of debt going forward.
Where do you think the sweet spot is in terms of that debt? Obviously, we were about 18.5% of GDP in terms of our debt level. During the global financial crisis, I think it peaked at about 30%. Where do you think we're headed?
We could easily go to 40% and nobody would bat an eyelid. But we can see countries like Japan and others who are able to maintain debt levels of 100% of GDP and they're still going fine. So really the thing is, we're in unprecedented waters and we are going to see the central banks around the world essentially printing money, which is going to be subsidizing or funding a lot of these government debts. So we shouldn't be particularly worried about it over the next little while because everybody's going to be borrowing a hell of a lot of money around the world. Relatively speaking, New Zealand will still look great relative to most of those countries.
Brett, I'm just wondering, obviously, this is a wage subsidy. Do we know where it leaves people like contractors, casual workers, sole traders?
I caught some comments that the Minister of Finance made in his remarks about it, including contractors. That'll obviously be a big question for us because we know that New Zealand is a nation of small businesses, lots of sole traders. I think it's also pleasing to see the government's also trying to encourage spending. So we're seeing some changes in deduction of low-value assets, which will encourage businesses to be continuing to purchase. We're seeing some changes in threshold around provisional tax, and we're also seeing a benefit for building owners with around depreciation, with 2% diminishing value able to be applied by building owners. So they are also thinking about asset owners as well as people who are in that trading environment. So on the face of it, with limited time to digest this, it looks pretty comprehensive. And certainly, we've been engaged with officials for a number of days, and with providing input. And I can say at face value, it looks like they've been listening.
So also they are creating a fund. This is the isolation fund. They're expecting businesses to still cover people's sick leave. What are you hearing about the impact of people having to go into basically mandatory isolation?
Look, our advice line, which is the first port of call for our 8,000 members, has been running red hot over the last few weeks, and probably the biggest issue we've been dealing with is around leave. Because obviously most employees in New Zealand get about 5 days sick leave. I think you'll find most employers are willing to be a little bit flexible. But when you start talking about 15 days and 20 days potentially being away from work, because it might be looking after yourself, but also looking after a member of your whānau.
Yeah, and what about if you have more than one worker who's locked up at home, in essence?
And which is really tricky. I mean, we've set up a Facebook group with our members where you've got businesses talking about, look, can I use one of your staff members? So I think one of the things we've already seen is businesses responding as a community and starting to work together around this. So I think with the clarity we've got today and the spirit that we've seen already, it maximises the chances that we'll get through this, as Shamubeel said, as a recession but not a depression.
So, Brett, are businesses actually borrowing workers?
They're certainly looking at it. I mean, there's also some aspects of this package today around redeployment. They're talking about that starting in Tairāwhiti, but we certainly know in other areas there's some work that MSD are doing around diverting workers from forestry into harvesting. Obviously, for anyone in our horticulture industry, this is harvesting season for many of them. So we're starting to see that. So there is an opportunity for us to play a role working with government to make sure that if businesses need workers, we can find them and we can do that effectively.
Shamubeel, obviously there is, aviation-related industries will be able to make application for these wage subsidies, but no specific mention of support for Air New Zealand. What are your expectations around that, given the enormous cuts that this airline is signalling? 3,700 jobs potentially on the block here.
Yeah, that is still to come. I mean, we know that from IATA that they're expecting significant number of airlines around the world to fail by May. So we are going to see some kind of bailout at some point in time. And expect we'll see what we've seen in the past where the government injects equity and takes a share of Air New Zealand. And this is the right thing to do because the reality is that we're going through this unprecedented shock to the tourism industry and to the aviation industry in particular. And we need those lifelines in terms of connectivity to the rest of the world to bring in supplies, including things like medicines, which almost exclusively come in the belly of planes.
Yeah, I mean, you are both talking about the fact that we are expecting a recession here versus depression as such. I mean, what are you predicting, Shamubeel? How bad is it going to get for us? Unemployment's around 4% now? What numbers do you think?
Well, to give you a bit of context, during the Great Depression, it rose to 11%. So all the jobs don't disappear, but we have a significant increase. So, at the top side, you'd say we might see 180,000 people unemployed, or in a medium sort of scenario, we might see 80,000 people unemployed. These are really big numbers, but even then, even in really terrible shocks, we will probably still see a large majority of New Zealanders still okay in terms of their jobs, and businesses. The thing that's unclear is we don't know what happens to a services-based economy. We're not allowed to interact with each other. We're interacting with each other less.
And those people who lack job security at the best of times are going to be the hardest hit, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. And that's why not having a standard period for unemployment benefits and those kinds of things are going to be really crucial, because those people on the marginal jobs are going to be really badly affected by this. And we need to make sure that we can give them as much help, as much of a social security net as possible.
Okay.
I mean, the other thing that was really clear for me was just that big investment of funds into the health sector. Being able to ramp up our ICUs in particular is going to be really critical, because as this infection comes, we're going to have more respirators.
Okay, both of you stay with me here. We're just going to go very quickly now to our business editor, Giles Beckford, for a quick update on how the markets have reacted to this package. Giles?
Lisa, generally they're muted. The currency is barely moved. Shares, well, they've got bigger issues at the moment, and a lot of the listed companies on the stock exchange will not qualify for much of the assistance that's been announced. They'll have to work through some of the special packages and provisions that may be put in place for bigger businesses, for complex businesses. The aviation sector package will come out on that later in the week. We'll get some more details on that. So for the time being, it's related to small businesses, medium businesses. The general view of those in the sector is that they're generally positive about the package, but in terms of strict market reaction, at the moment, it's, as I say, muted.
Thanks, Giles. That is our business editor, Giles Beckford, there, just giving us a quick update on the markets. If I can come back to you, Brett, overall, what is your feeling about this package? Is it going to save businesses that are teetering?
I think it definitely will. I think the government has listened to our feedback, and certainly in the quantum of the package, they've done something that I don't think any of us expected at this level, at 4% of GDP. So this is a really positive start, both direct financial support, but I think also in terms of confidence and cohesion, and giving businesses the confidence the government is listening. And if we have to go back again, as we understand a bit more about the impact of this crisis, it'll encourage businesses that government's willing to be flexible.
What are your expectations in the next few months? I mean, it's so hard to tell, but what do you plan for?
We're planning for a lot of disruption. We know that many of our members are already operating on pretty thin margins, and there are some hard calls for people to make. I don't think anyone likes to think of the idea of redundancies or moving people out during this kind of these sort of situations. But we know that there'll be a lot of tough conversations for businesses to have. So having this as a backstop and maybe being able to delay some of those decisions until the situation is a bit clearer, will China come back earlier? Will some of the other markets for exporters be accessible earlier? That can only help the situation.
Appreciate you joining me today. That's Brett O'Reilly from the Employers and Manufacturers Association. And also joining me was economist Shamubeel Eaqub. And if you're just joining us, the government has released an economic bailout package. It's worth $12.1 billion. It represents 4% of GDP, more than all of this government's new operating spending in 3 budgets combined. It includes wage subsidies of $5.1 billion, $500 million for health and $126 million in a self-isolation support support package. That is all for right now, but do remember we will be back at 5 when we'll do it all again with our normal Checkpoint program. And from 6:30 tonight, I'll be joined by Westpac Chief Economist Dominic Stevens, First Union's Tali Williams and business consultant Phil O'Reilly as an extended Checkpoint analyses the business stimulus package tonight all the way through till 7 p.m. But for now, it is back to Jesse Mulligan.
Thanks, Lisa, and the Checkpoint team for that special edition covering the government's fiscal response to Covid-19. It's 2:30. Lovely to have you listening this afternoon. You can text me on 2101 or email jesse@rnz.co.nz. So I'll be with you from now through to 3:45, and then Wallace Chapman takes over as usual for the pre-panel, and the panel will include some discussion and analysis of those measures just announced. Tuesday is the day we do our music feature, and given how many people have watched the movie Judy, it seemed like a great opportunity to look at the music of Judy Garland. Let's get into the mood with an early song of hers called The Trolley Song.